Hey, everybody. This is Cody here again with you for friends occasionally not disagreeing. Wanted to touch on a little mini episode today regarding something that's really captured my interest again for the last maybe 2+ years at this point, and that's professional wrestling. I grew up on professional wrestling as a kid. I can remember sitting in the living room with my mother and father and watching WWF at that time, or even NWA wrestling. Later on, WCW wrestling and WWE perhaps came along somewhere in that time span. I forget exactly where. As time went on, I became, a big fan of professional wrestling. I had a lot of magazines regarding that, video games and posters and a couple action figures and things of that nature. My friends and I would always have a pay-per-view party every time there was a WCW pay-per-view, and once in a while we would catch a WWF pay-per-view and even ECW pay-per-views at the time period. And those were just really good memories I always had with my friends, and something that, was also a family tradition too. So it kind of made sense that it stuck for me when all was said and done. I was a big WCW fan back in the day, World Championship Wrestling, and that went out of business. If you're a wrestling fan, you know this already, but if you haven't kept up in a long time or even just know a little bit about wrestling, there were the main two companies for quite a while. 2001 is when they went out of business, and after that happened, they were purchased by the WWE, the World Wrestling Entertainment, World Wrestling Federation, owned by Vince McMahon. I kind of fell out of love because I had never really liked the WWF, WWE for quite a few years at that point. And so, periodically I would check in every once in a while and see what was happening in the world of professional wrestling. There were minor promotions that I would check out once in a while. TNA Wrestling, Total Nonstop Action, Lucha Underground, I think I've mentioned in a previous podcast, I really got into for a while. And there were some other little tiny ones too that people tried, but nothing really held my attention for very long. And the storylines were either terrible on one or the production was just cut short, tragically, like Lucha Underground was on the other. And this was until about 2019 when I heard rumblings that there would be a new wrestling company coming into existence with billionaire backing behind it. And this is the Khan family. Tony Khan is the president, CEO, general manager, and also runs the creative side, so the storylines, if you will, of All Elite Wrestling. And his father, Shahid Khan, is the owner also of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And so they had enough financial money to actually put out a product that could compete with the WWE, which no one had been able to successfully try for it's about 2 decades, about 20 years, give or take. So this was kind of an exciting thing for me because I was, as I mentioned here, not really paying attention to wrestling that much and was never really a WWE fan for all those years in between. And so this started in 2019 when we had a band of wrestlers that came together along with Tony Khan. And the original four big names tied to this as executive vice presidents within the company. So this is kind of an older mentality of wrestlers helping to run and promote that company from within. We had Matt and Nick Jackson, who are collectively known as the Young Bucks and have been probably on the independent scene in wrestling for 15+ years at this point, I would say. I'll talk about them more in a bit here. We had Cody Rhodes, the son of course, Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, the legendary wrestler from the 80s and early 90s. And then we had a guy by the name of Kenny Omega, who had made mostly a name for himself in Japan as a very technical and occasionally high-flying wrestler as well. But he's known to put on some of the highest rated matches and have some of the best work rates in his matches of people in the last 10 years. The other big name that they snagged to get this whole company started when they put on their first pay-per-view show, which was called, I'm going to forget now, All In, I think was the first one that they had, was a guy by the name of Chris Jericho. And if you have heard of wrestling for the last 25 years, you've heard of Chris Jericho. He is one of the legends. Some people put on what they call the Mount Rushmore of wrestling, maybe one of the four best wrestlers of all time in terms of total personality and also ability in the ring. Chris Jericho was a fan of wrestling for his whole life, and he started in, a lot of minor places and then went to WCW after he was in ECW, and then finally was the world's first undisputed champion in the WWE when he beat The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin in the same night. So this is a guy with some pedigree. They brought him in as well, and that was maybe of the five, the name that most casual wrestling fans might be aware of, just from his previous history. And so these five really, along with a whole, ensemble of other wrestlers, started this new company, where they jumped over from other promotions and joined and things of that nature. Some of the earlier wrestlers they had in this company, just to run off a few names here, we had Christopher Daniels, Scorpio Sky, and Frankie Kazarian, who were called SoCal Uncensored. Hangman Adam Page, who's still there today. We have Dr. Britt Baker, who has really become the cornerstone of the women's division. Talk more about that in just a second. Pac, who came over from WWE as well. And the Lucha Brothers, Pentagon and Rey Fenix, and then also the Best Friends, who would be Trent Beretta and Chuck Taylor. Now, some of the other people they had jump over right away were Jon Moxley. I'd mentioned perhaps I was reading his autobiography not too long ago from December into January. This would have been a guy by the name of Dean Ambrose in the WWE. And so this company gets started, and not only are they, putting a lot of financial might behind what they have as an alternative vision to the WWE, they also were able to procure a national TV show, and that would be AEW Dynamite, which was, I think, originally 1 hour. I'm not positive on that. And then it went to 2 hours after that, and still is 2 hours today. That's on Wednesdays. That's going to be from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern time, which I watch fairly regularly now, almost every week. And they have since added a second TV show on national television. That's AEW Rampage. That's on Friday nights at 10 Eastern time, which is a terrible time slot, but, whatever. That's a 1 hour show. Now, they also have two YouTube shows that they've kept up for quite a while. AEW Dark and AEW Dark Elevation. These are both YouTube shows that they record generally in the arenas before the other two televised shows, and then they will play the matches on the YouTube show. All right, so that's kind of the setup of all of this. Now, this has originally hooked me in because I knew this was coming. It sounded really fun, and I found out they were coming to Chicago, which is kind of one of their major hub cities. They're based out of Jacksonville, but Tony Khan has some ties to Chicago, and so he always calls it home when he comes here. And so they were coming here in, I believe, the summer. Man, I forget now. Is that 21 or 20? I forget now how long we've been watching this again. But my kids didn't know a ton about it. They knew a little bit about some guys from the WWE, from some Scooby-Doo movies and some other things, but I thought it would be fun to bring them with me and go to see some wrestling shows, because as much of a fan as I've always been throughout my life, I really have only been to a few shows. I went to a WCW pay-per-view that I can recall, an ECW show in Green Bay. I went to a TNA show in Wisconsin, and also a WWE SmackDown show also in Wisconsin. So that's really it, those four shows. But I was super intrigued to go see, a big professionally done show again. And this had a lot of the people that I knew. It had a lot of the kind of alternative to WWE mindset, which I'll get to here in just a bit. And so I said to the kids, do you want to go? And they said yes. And so then I said, all right, well, we got to know what the storylines are, because for those people out there who may or may not ever listen to this podcast, if you don't watch wrestling, you don't understand it, partially because you don't get invested in the storylines. If you're somebody who is not a wrestling fan and just happen to be listening to this episode by some chance, the idea that people go out to the ring and they beat each other up, or they fake beat each other up, as sometimes people will say, it's the storyline that the fans get invested in. The moves are fantastic. As I've mentioned before on a previous podcast, wrestling is live theater. It is the most talented people from Shakespeare, along with members of the U.S. gymnastic team. They're able to go out and tell a story, both verbally and with their bodies, in ways that other athletes are not able to in any sport. figure skating of all things might be the closest, where they attempt to try to manipulate their body in some way to tell a narrative. But this goes so far beyond that, because you have the cameras, you have the audience reactions, you have the other performer, you have to play off of back and forth as you're in there. And then on top of that, you have the promos and the interviews, and the idea that you get to meet these wrestlers and see who they are as characters and as people, what their relationship is with their friends in the company, with their enemies in the company. And these are all things that add together to make you as the fan invested in and excited about their matches that they're going to have. So we did begin to watch AEW, and quickly, I kind of fell into old habits here, which was just really wrapping myself back into loving the action, loving the presentation on TV, looking forward to have something every week to watch. Having, those people that started to become my favorites, my kids' favorites, that really was fun for us. They both had a few that they really liked. I had a few that I really liked. Watching the company grow in the couple of years that we have been with it has been fantastic. I think after the first, 2 shows, I think I took the kids to, I think I have been to maybe a total of 6 or 7 of these shows in Chicago now. Including a pay-per-view I've gone to. I've went to a theater to check out a pay-per-view that they showed on a live stream. We have been to Dynamites. We've been to Rampages. We've been to quite a few. The kids have been to some. Boston went with me, just the 2 of us to one. Cameron's been with me to, I think, 3 or 4, along with Boston. And then I've gone to, 1, 2 or 3 myself on these as well. Oftentimes I'll just wait till the day of the event and see if someone will sell a premium ticket for a cheaper price because they can't make that show. And if it's just me, then I can just zip over there and get in on a pretty good seat for pretty cheap. I've sat as close as, I think, 3 rows away from the ring. I think 3 rows away from the ring is probably the closest we've been. We've been in the back row before by the announce table, so we get to see them and wave to them. The company itself has put on such a fantastic show and such a honestly good value for your money. The tickets are not cheap, and I'm kind of a seat snob as well. If you're a sports fan but haven't been to a pro wrestling show before, think about the size of a football stadium and then shrink that and you get basically a baseball field. And if you shrink that down, you get like eventually to where you'd have a hockey arena, and if you shrink that down, you get down to like a basketball court, and then you still got to shrink that down like 10 more times until you get to the size of an actual wrestling ring. So even though they play in these arenas and have shows where there's, capacities of 10, 20, 30,000 people, unless you're really close, it's really hard to see. You can watch it on the Jumbotron, as they call it in the WWE, or the big screen where they kind of have like a live footage of the match going on, like people would see basically at home, but it's on the screen there. But it is pretty fun to be really up close. Now, one thing that sets this kind of apart from other places we've gone as well is they have a ring announcer by the name of Justin Roberts that my daughter loves. That is actually now her favorite person in the company, is the ring announcer of all people, because he oftentimes will talk to us in between commercial breaks or before the show, and we'll bring signs and hold them up, and he'll talk to Cameron. He's talked to Boston before at these shows, and it's just a really fun, kind of interactive atmosphere with the wrestlers and the personnel as well. So that's been really fun. And then as far as, being on TV, that's a blast if you can happen to be on the right side of the camera for the right show. We've seen ourselves on TV probably, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, I would say. I've held up signs that have been on TV before. I have even told one of my classes I would hold up a sign for them when I went, and I did hold up a sign for them. I think it made it on TV at one point. But anyway, this has all been a ton of fun to re-get invested into wrestling, okay? And so some of the things that I really like about this, beyond just its introduction years here and the people behind it, the owner, manager here, Tony Khan, just such a good dude. He is basically a sports fan who had lots of money, millions of dollars to play fantasy booker, like you run a fantasy football team, except he was a wrestling fan with the same passion. And between him and his family, he had the money to go out and sign all of these people that would be like the fantasy players he would draft, except he pays for them to come work for him and his wrestling promotion. And so that's where we end up with this amazingly loaded talent lineup. There were times I can remember WCW back in the day, they had, if you stopped and counted 75, 80, 90 people on the roster that, would show up. Most of them were not spectacular wrestlers. Most of them were people that were just there to lose, to make the good people look good. But AEW genuinely probably has 100 people under contract, and most of them that are under a full contract are a legitimate threat. If you see them on TV, there's a chance they could win. But, there's so many people currently in this promotion that people will go, shows or weeks or months even before they are seen again, because there's just so many people, they can't have everybody on TV at once. So this has been a good company as well for a lot of the rivalries that have taken place in the time that we have watched. And, we didn't really catch a lot of that first year to year and a half of AEW, but in the years that we have watched, or I have really gotten back in love with this to the point where I, collect the trading cards for this company as well now. And, watch when they're going to bring their show to the towns and where they're at and all these other things I keep track of too, just to kind of have some fun with it. Because, man, I love to be invested. You guys know that. I love to be invested in anything. And this is just a huge thing that I can be invested in. I have met communities of fans, both in online social media groups, just that love the product, people that hate this company and love the other company, people that collect the trading cards. There's just been, people all over the country and really all over the world that love this so much and share the same passion. And it's just such fun way to get to know other people. When I went to the last pay-per-view in Chicago, I was in like the 5th or 6th row, and, a guy came and sat down right next to me and had the thickest accent. And I was talking to him for maybe a half hour before the show started. And he was there from Germany. And I was like, oh man, that's awesome. Like, are you here in Chicago just for this show? And he was like, yeah, man, I came just for the week to watch Dynamite and Rampage and then the pay-per-view and have the whole week be AEW. And then I have to fly back to Germany. And I was like, that's so cool. So just again, the chance to share this thing with other people makes it so special. And, I love it too, because if you don't watch this, you don't get it. But if you're a basketball fan, if you're a football fan, you watch them on TV, and sometimes you go to the games, but when you go to those, you're like a nameless face in the mob of people, and if I go to this, if I yell loud enough, that guy in the ring or that girl in the ring, they'll hear me and they'll look at me, and, maybe they'll flick me off, or maybe they'll smile at me, or we had Chris Jericho say thank you because Cameron made a cool sign for him one time for his song. And so, it's high fives from these people as they're leaving and everything else. So you do really get to build this bond with you and the people. I wish we had a chance to meet more of them. They do usually have a fan convention when they come to town in Chicago for a pay-per-view only. But the tickets are ridiculously expensive. So we haven't done that yet, but maybe sometime we'll try to do that and go to wherever they're at and try to meet a bunch of these people as well. But anyway, so they have several championship titles in this company, which have provided the basis for many a good feud in the time I've been watching it here. And I certainly don't have time to cover every person in this roster. But in terms of the men's division, we have a huge roster, again, as I said, but notable people here would be the current world champion of AEW, a man by the name of Maxwell Jacob Friedman, MJF, who is Cameron's favorite wrestler with his Burberry scurf. This guy is just a complete asshole who makes fun of the fans in every city they go to. He's a very old school villain, or a heel as they would call him in wrestling, mocking the heroes and putting down the fans and trying to get them to boo him instead of cheer, and cheer the person he's against. He's a scared little chicken shit, and he's also a pretty damn good wrestler and a fantastic speaker on the microphone. So he's kind of a homegrown talent, as they call them, somebody that became big in AEW. So he's fantastic to watch. The current TNT champion, which I guess would sort of be like the secondary champion for the men, is TNT, because this is broadcast on TNT and TBS, by the way, for their syndicated shows, the national ones on cable. Darby Allin is the guy who is the TNT champion, and this is just a super unique persona, but also not a persona. He's legitimately crazy, I believe. He's this little tiny guy who, I mean, probably weighs just over 100 pounds, maybe 125, 150 pounds tops. He's very, very tiny. And this is a guy who paints half of his face with like skull designs essentially and keeps the other half unpainted. He's a natural skateboarder who does that in his free time and also is a genuine thrill seeker. For example, he recently set up and jumped over his house in a Jeep because he wanted to do that. And he's done other crazy stunts as well. He's friends with Shaun White and Tony Hawk and these other, legendary extreme athletes as well. And one of the most interesting things about this guy, Boston loves this guy, this is one of his favorites as well, is that his mentor and sometimes tag team partner in AEW is Sting. Sting is his tag team partner. Sting is my all-time favorite wrestler, from the 80s back when he had the bleach blonde hair and the colorful paint and makeup and the sequin jackets with tassels he'd wear to the ring, all the way to the Crow Sting from the later days when he adapted like the brooding look with the black and white face paint, or even occasionally, rarely, the red and black face paint for the NWO Wolfpack that he was in back in WCW for a while. But anyway, Sting is this guy's mentor, and so he's kind of been like his probably behind the scenes role model as well in terms of like how to take care of yourself. Don't let the business catch up to you. Don't fall prey to, a lot of the tropes that people fall into as far as bad habits and partying on the road or whatever. But Darby Allin's actually also known for being what they call straight edge. And that would mean that, he stays away from drugs and alcohol and all these other things. And I guess this guy just really gets his highs off of doing these crazy thrill stunts because that's what he seems to always be involved with. The other single male champion is a guy by the name of Orange Cassidy. He holds the newest belt. This is called the AEW All Atlantic Champion, which is defended not only in the United States, but around the world against different people from different countries. This is probably one of the most unique wrestlers I've ever seen, and that says something because I've seen both the professional promotions I've talked about earlier, as well as some indie promotions in Indiana and Illinois and also Michigan. But basically, Orange Cassidy's gimmick is that he wears blue jeans to the ring. He wears a denim jacket. He wears sunglasses. He has his hair slicked down. And he doesn't like to put a lot of effort into things at times. So he's kind of lazy. He'll do like a lazy punch or lazy kicks, which just the fans eat up. Such a good act. They get into it and chant along with them. And his whole gimmick is he's just like, whatever. But when the match starts, this guy can wrestle. Like he'll go from moving very slowly to keeping his hands in his pockets and doing like moonsaults and somersaults and kip ups and like jumping over people and under people. And then finally taking his hands out of his pockets and doing other moves to them. And he's really explosive, super cool, but he's like the most laid back wrestler I've ever seen. Some purists out there from the olden days hate this guy because he makes, kind of a mockery of the sport, but yet he's so good at the sport. It's crazy. And then we also have, it's another one of Boston's favorites. And then we have the current World Trios Champions, which is a three-man team, I guess, which is the Elite. And that would be the aforementioned Nick and Matt Jackson, the Young Bucks, and their friend Kenny Omega. They just won those trios titles in a best-of-7 match from another fantastic team called Death Triangle, which has 3 members, I said as well, Pac, Ray, Phoenix, and Pentagon. Fantastic matches. All 6 of these men are kind of known for occasional power moves, but for the most part, flying and jumping and kicking each other with super kicks and things of this nature. They just finished matches where they had falls count anywhere and weapons are legal and ladder matches. And these people are ripped a lot by the purists as well because they claim that they're too flippy floppy. But in reality, they are so acrobatic. I mean, if you have any interest in watching gymnastics or any of the, gymnastic-y type sports that you would see, gymnastics team events type stuff, like they probably could be in that because they can flip around, they can manipulate their body through the ropes as they're jumping or, jump up and grab onto somebody and spin around twice in the air and flip them over. And they're just so talented. It's crazy. And then the last current men's title holders we have are the tag team champions, which are called the Acclaimed. And this is a guy by the name of Max Caster and Anthony Bowens. And this is another tag team, just like MJF, Darby Allin, and Orange Cassidy, that's really getting their first taste of fame here in AEW and having a fantastic career. The fans got into them so much in the last year with their scissoring chants that they enjoy doing, that they're just like on a stratosphere rocket right now for how popular they are. But they're so much fun to watch. And they semi-recently have added Hall of Famer from the WWE, Billy Gunn, the Ass Man, to their side as their manager. And so like they're even more popular now because of that. So other notable men's wrestlers we have here, Adam Cole, who has been out actually with, I believe, a bad injury for quite a while, 6 months or so. Just came back this past week. We have Adam Page, who's fantastic. Adam Cole came from the WWE. Adam Page is another one that's kind of hitting his stride here in AEW. Just signed a really interesting guy called Bandito, who is a luchador. And some of these other people that they have signed as well came from another promotion called Ring of Honor, which was probably the top independent promotion after ECW stopped being in business. And they kind of went out of business. Ring of Honor did not too long ago. The pandemic basically claimed them. And Tony Khan and AEW actually purchased Ring of Honor. So it's kind of interesting. They own two companies now, technically, and have all the video library from 20 years of Ring of Honor. And so we have, early footage of famous wrestlers in both AEW and WWE. So it's kind of interesting they have all that footage as well. Other famous people or impressive people at the moment, they have Bryan Danielson here in AEW. You might know him better as Daniel Bryan from WWE. They have a faction called the House of Black, led by Malachi Black, who is also from WWE. And then they also have a couple of people paired with him in that. Another big-time wrestler here is Christian Cage from all the way back in the WWE Attitude Era. He's still here, kind of bounces back and forth between managing and wrestling both, but another good pickup for them. They have a tag team called FTR, Cash Wheeler and Dax Harwood, who are both fantastic wrestlers as well. We have a really unique guy by the name of Danhausen, who was like if a sideshow clown went evil and talked in a weird vaudeville German voice. That's kind of what he is, but he's super entertaining. Claudio Castagnoli is Cesaro from the WWE. He is here now as well, and he is the Ring of Honor World Champion. We have a team called Top Flight that's really good, high-flying tag team. Technically, CM Punk is on the roster at the moment, although after some problems last year, he has not been on TV, so I think that's probably over with, but to be determined, I guess. But that was a big thing when he came back at Chicago. Dustin Rhodes, former Goldust and also WCW star, is here. Jake Hager, who was Jack Swagger back in the day. We have a couple young talents here. Hook, who is the son of Taz, legendary wrestler in his own right. And then Jungle Boy Jack Perry. Both of these are upstarts here in AEW. Jack Perry is the real-life son of actor Luke Perry, who passed away recently. The Hardy Boys are both here, Jeff and Matt Hardy. Jay Lethal, who has been around for 20 years as well. Keith Lee from WWE is over here as well. Fantastic new Japanese wrestler called Konosuke Takeshita is here as well. Let's see. Anybody else we need to highlight here? I don't mean to just send out names to you all. Miro, who used to be Rusev, in the WWE, is over here as well. And let's see here. Anybody else in the thing here that we need to mention? The Big Show and Mark Henry are both in AEW as announcers, so that's a little different than you might know them from. Ricky Starks is a fantastic wrestler as well. Another one that's an original here to AEW. He's just getting his maybe first mega push right now with Chris Jericho as his opponent. That looks good. He's really entertaining. Roosh is a Mexican wrestler who's fantastic, super strong. And another one here hasn't been seen by American audiences yet. Samoa Joe, who has been in many companies throughout his career, is here and still killing people. Mentioned Sting already is here. Sting does wrestle occasionally still and does crazy things, even though he's, older now. We have Wheeler Yuta and Wardlow, a couple more original talents here to AEW as well. So fantastic lineup for the men. And as I mentioned, that's probably like a third of the people actually in the company at the moment. On the women's division, they've been slowly refining who is on the roster and adding people here and there, but the women have two titles here in AEW. We have Jamie Hayter, who is the current women's world champion. She is another homegrown talent here in AEW who is a villain, but I suspect will be a face or a hero by our next week's shows because the storylines are changing here. And we have Jade Cargill, who is basically a basketball player fitness model that has made the transition over to wrestling. She is undefeated. She's like 48-0, 49-0 at the time I record this. She's still pretty green. She's learning how to be a wrestler still, but she's the TBS champion. And she also is kind of famous because she loves to cosplay when she comes to the ring. So she has dressed as Mystique and Storm from the X-Men, Shitara from the Thundercats, and several others that I'll probably forget at this moment. But they're both pretty good. We have some other lady wrestlers here who are also pretty good. Britt Baker, DMD, is kind of the face of the division still. They built around her, and that's been a good payoff. Akira Shida is the Japanese superstar here. She's really good as well. Hikaru, there we go. I said it wrong. Hikaru Shida. We have, let's see here. Lots of famous names if you know some of these as well. Madison Rayne, who's a legendary women's wrestler here. Mercedes Martinez wrestles in Ring of Honor. Ruby Soho was Ruby Riott in WWE. She's here. Saraya just joined recently from WWE. She was Paige. Tony Storm has come over from WWE. And then AEW has some of their own kind of famous wrestlers here as well. Thunder Rosa is super popular. Red Velvet's pretty good. My personal favorite, Penelope Ford. And then there's some others in here as well. Anna Jay and Ty Conti and Chris Statlander. And there's probably, what do we got here? Close to 25, 27 wrestlers on the female division as well. As far as announcers, this is a Hall of Fame broadcast team. We have the legendary Jim Ross, Taz, and Tony Schiavone calling action, along with Excalibur, who used to run PWG, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, out in California. And we also have Renee Paquette, who is a longtime WWE announcer and longtime podcast host, who has just joined as well. So she's also kind of a fun one to see join in the company. Behind the scenes on the coach side, we have Billy Gunn and also Jerry Lynn, who is famous from ECW and some other places. The legendary Arn Anderson of the Four Horsemen, and Vicky Guerrero, the wife of the late Eddie Guerrero, is here as well. So I'm from top to bottom, this is a stacked roster. This is a complete roster. This is a roster that's always signing new people. It seems like weekly, occasionally, monthly, but so many people here. They have the size of the roster. They have the financial backing. They have the TV shows to match up with the WWE. This is really the first time we've had a true chance to have an alternative to the WWE if you are a wrestling fan, a professional wrestling fan, which I was. And then, like I said, I dropped out because WWE doesn't interest me and still doesn't. But now that this is here, I'm back and totally invested in this, watching it all the time. And like I said, talking about it with people online and everything else. So if this is something you're interested in, there's always storylines that are taking place. Any given TV show you watch probably has 6 to 10 wrestling storylines taking place on it. Sometimes it's just a quick interview in the back. Sometimes it's a match that furthers the story. Sometimes it's a promo where they come out and talk in the microphone to the audience or the other wrestlers or whatever. But this is such a fun thing to get into. If you haven't ever checked out pro wrestling, and I know some people are just unwilling or maybe even a little leery to try this, it's so good. It's like the best drama you could watch matched up with fantastic actors because, again, as a reminder, when you watch Tom Cruise or you watch whoever, Chris Hemsworth or whoever your movie star you want to pick is, if they mess something up, they can do it again. They can get a second take. Okay. But that's not the case here because they're on live TV. So they have to hit everything. If they make a mistake, it's usually almost imperceptible. The best wrestling fans might catch it. Somebody who actually works in this business probably would notice it. But for the most part, you're not going to notice that they made a mistake because they cover it so well, and in this federation as well, different than WWE, the people come out and they write their own monologues and their own soliloquies, if you will, to the audience where they pour out their heart and they can get such an amazing reaction. It's so fun to see somebody new come out or cheer for your heroes or boo for your villains, or you never know when magic will happen. You never know when someone will suddenly show up during a match for someone else, or a new person will debut in the company, and that'll just lead to excitement all around. Or when something just really organic will happen, such as they have two ladies who have been heroes for the last month and a half, 2 months, and villains who have been villains for about 2 years. And suddenly, last week, you listen to the fans and they started to cheer one group and boo the other group. And then that changes how you present the people to your audience. So by this week, they're kind of starting to trade sides. And I suspect, like I said, in a couple of weeks, they're going to be flipped. And the people that have been villains for 3 years are going to have a chance to be heroes now and have people cheer them all the time. And that'll completely refresh their character and make the audience invest in these people again a different way. And then the people who've been playing heroes can now start to be villains. They can be booed and they can have new life for their career that way as well. So this is All Elite Wrestling, and this has been really a passion of mine for the past 2+ years at this point. I just love to get into these storylines and the things they can do. If you haven't seen a wrestling match in 2022-23, and maybe watched back in the 80s or even the 90s, but haven't seen anybody wrestle since then, it's day and night. The people from the 80s look like plodding cavemen who were like super muscular but had very little athleticism. The 90s, we started to see the increase of wrestlers getting a little smaller and flipping around a little bit more, having some more, bounce to their moves and flight to their moves and strikes to their moves. And now here we're seeing like that to just a whole nother degree where it's pretty crazy what some of these people are able to pull off in the ring while they're there. So I encourage you, Wednesday nights, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock here in Central Time Zone. That's Dynamite. And Rampage is on Friday nights at 10 Eastern. That would be 9 Central here where I am. Dynamite's on TBS. Rampage is on TNT. Man, and if you get a chance to go see an AEW show in a city near you, please take advantage of that. They've stuck mostly to the Midwest and the East Coast. The pandemic was very hard on them. That's a whole nother episode we could do someday, how all wrestling companies fared with having no audience be allowed to be there due to pandemic guidelines. But if you do get the chance to go, everybody that we have seen and got high fives from and, taken pictures of and autographs from a couple people, yada, yada, they're so nice. They love their fans. They love to have you come out and they put on such a good product. Tony Khan himself is usually there and will sneak out to the audience a couple times a show and just kind of get you pumped up. And, it's clear that he loves what he does. And it's clear that the performers there love working for this company also. So anyway, just a little mini one for you today here. I may make this a recurring installment. I may come back every month or two and just kind of give you the update on what's going on and, I'm hoping that this topic in particular may bring in some more audience members for us, because we are a very diverse podcast. There's not a lot of podcasts out there that are multi-genred. And I kind of got this idea from Chris Jericho, who I just mentioned, his podcast, where he will have episode on music, episode on the supernatural, and then he'll talk about wrestling, and then he'll talk about book deals, and then he'll talk about politics or some other weird thing. That's kind of what we do here. We cover all the different topics, hoping that we can hit a bunch of different people that have an interest in a bunch of different topics, and then we can hook you and have you come back again to join us for another episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. We'll see you next time. Take care.